Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer and engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. As warm-blooded creatures, we need constant energy to maintain our body temperature and high metabolism rate. Cold-blooded animals can get by on eating a few times a month, but not us. We need to eat daily, multiple times per day. We're also complex organisms. We need different foods that contain different nutrients. No single food can give us everything we need, and so we instinctively search out variety. At a certain point, this variety became the diversity of food cultures we have today, which continue to evolve, hybridize, and expand. Jewish communities, a tiny subset of the human population, have an array of food cultures, something our guest is dedicated to preserving and sharing.
We're happy to chat with Amanda Dell, Program Director at the Jewish Food Society, a nonprofit organization that works to preserve, celebrate, and revitalize Jewish culinary heritage from around the world. She also hosts the Jewish Food Society's podcast, Schmaltzy. Amanda, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Hi, thank you both so much for having me. I hope I can live up to the title of this podcast and be, at the very least, slightly amusing.
Jewish is an adjective and food is a noun, implying that Jewish describes the food itself. What makes Jewish food Jewish?
Well, I love this question. I think it's kind of like the million-dollar question, kind of what a lot of our work here at Jewish, Food Society tries to answer or, highlight and draw attention to. So, Jews live and have lived all over the world. So we feel at Jewish Food Society that Jewish food is really made up of like a lot of different micro cuisines. While people around the world might associate Jewish food with things that are quite well known, like bagels or babka or matzo ball soup or chopped liver, a lot of those foods come from the Eastern European Ashkenazi, food canon. But Jews, as I said, live all over the world. And typically, their cuisines are made up of the regional, they're influenced by the region that they're living. And then kind of in a negotiation between that and Jewish holidays and Jewish kosher laws. So I don't know if there's one answer to the question of what is Jewish food, which I actually think is very exciting, is that the answer could be that there are so many things, that are Jewish food. And that's what we explore at Jewish Food Society through our research, which I'm happy to, get into more specifically.
Yeah, so in my primary field, which is Jewish musicology, some of us actually avoid the term Jewish music as much as we can anyway, because we're really talking about music of the Jews or music used by Jewish people. Jewish music cultures, like you're saying with food, have always and everywhere been influenced by surroundings, the music of neighbors, as it were, such that maybe shared traits are usually what define Jewish music cultures, not exclusive traits. So is there something similar, it sounds like, going on with Jewish food?
I grew up in New York. I'm a third-generation New Yorker. So, I identify first and foremost as a New Yorker, and then secondarily, I think, as a cultural Jew. So I grew up in a very culturally Jewish home, and also obviously being in New York, surrounded by that, but in a home that was not religious. So I think that to answer going back to your question about how you view music and Jewish music and how it relates, to food, I think, as I said earlier, I think one thing that really unite Jewish food from around the world is really the traditions around holidays, Shabbat, and, kosher laws. So a lot of different communities have an overnight dish that, it started because those that were observing Shabbat didn't want to cook overnight. So you would put a big pot or something either in an oven or, back in the day, in a communal oven. A lot of the Ashkenazi Eastern European people would call it cholent, which is like a stew with like meat and beans, which we have, of course, have a recipe for in the archive. But there's like many Sephardic communities that make something called like the tefina, which is like a similar idea, but just of an overnight one-pot dish for Shabbat, but with different ingredients. Like the Iraqi Jewish community has something called tabit, where it's like rice and chicken like cooked overnight. So I think that while Jewish food can be so many, different kind of things, there are themes that, unite it, again, based on holidays, Shabbat, and, kosher laws.
Yeah, it almost seems like, again, pointing to my field of Jewish music, it's more accurate to define the thing by what it does or why it is done, as opposed to the specific ingredients, which are kind of cobbled together from whatever the surroundings are. And it's how you use those ingredients for a Jewish purpose, perhaps, that makes it Jewish.
I think that's partly right. I think that in addition to that, there's like, rituals surrounding Jewish food, like eating, challah or other bread on Shabbat. The Ethiopian community has something called dabo bread that they eat on Shabbat, or, again, it's around like those rituals of what different communities would use to like break the fast on Yom Kippur. Now, why do, a lot of people like in New York or, in LA, American Jews like would have like bagels and lox? Like, again, it's something cold that you don't have to cook after you've been fasting, for the whole day. So I think it's really a combination, of all of those things that you mentioned.
The Jewish Food Society is built around an archive of thousands of family recipes and the stories behind them. Why is it so important to archive these foods and the stories behind them?
We truly feel that these recipes and the histories that are attached to them like are our cultural DNA. And in some cases, they're in danger of being lost. I think that there's, in a lot of our research, like what we find is that, many families, especially women, they wanted to have careers, they wanted to, enter the workforce. And there was a point in time where, women they wanted to have a life also outside of the kitchen. So it wasn't so important to like pass these recipes down, generation to generation. And so sometimes our work is really digging, into these family recipes and seeing how the younger generations have taken them and honored them, and then even sometimes making them a little bit, of their own. And I also think that the work that we do is so important. And I can speak, really from a personal perspective as, again, someone that had a very narrow and sheltered view of what Jewish food was growing up. And the importance of our archive is that we share recipes and stories from all around the world, from Jewish Danish families, with roots in Copenhagen, from a Brazilian, Jewish communities, from the communities of North Africa, from obviously like, right here in New York, from, other places that you might not expect or have known about, to find Jewish food. There's a community of actually like going back Iraqi Baghdadi Jews that then settled in India. And so they've created like their own cuisine there. And it's just so incredible to learn, again, about these communities that there hasn't been that much awareness around, and understand what their Jewish food is and how they celebrate, mourn, love, around the table. And just a little bit of insight into our process, like we do deep research with the family. We have an amazing editor. She'll actually interview the family, and we write like a narrative essay about how these recipes that they've shared with us have influenced, their family and what they mean to their family, also within the greater context of history. And then we take these recipes, we bring them back to our test kitchen, we recipe test them, we make sure that they're good for a home cook. And that's truly a lot of the work that we do, because a lot of these recipes are not exactly in they're just not, they need development. You know, a lot of grandparents or older generations are like, okay, it's like a teacup of this, or it should taste like this, or sometimes they even are typically using ingredients that we might not find, you know, so easily now, or that, you know, we don't use in the same way now. And then we also create all of the imagery that you see on the archive. So we wanted to have beautiful, vibrant, inspiring photos like of the food that we create. So again, taking inspiration from the families, but really presenting it like in a modern way that will hopefully encourage and inspire people to cook.
And it sounds like the work you do is also kind of a relatable window using food into the broader diversity of the Jewish people.
Definitely. I think that for a lot of young adults, like food, we view food as, and our work at Jewish Food Society as a platform for people to engage with their identity. You know, they really don't identify with their Jewishness in more of like a traditional way, but in terms of like eating, cooking, gathering around the table, that is a way that they connect with their Judaism.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise that the holiday that's most celebrated among American Jews is Passover because it's a meal, right?
Well, I love Passover because I love, you know, we're all about stories, and we tell stories, obviously, like on our archive. I share them, you know, on our podcast, through our social media, through our events, and Passover is like a, you know, it's a built-in story. So yeah, I think that we've really have some like incredible research about different kinds of Passover traditions on our archive, and I've made a lot of the recipes from it. There's like incredible recipes from an Italian family, from their Passover table, that are like some of my favorites. We have this amazing chef in New York named Fanny Gerson, who grew up in Mexico City, and she has like a spicy like matzo ball soup that is really amazing, kind of more like flavor profiles like of Mexico with like cilantro, lime, avocado, still with matzo balls. So I think Passover also, like, it's like a culinary challenge in a way because of not eating bread, but I also think that it's a really fascinating exploration of a lot of different, you know, communities' culinary traditions around the table.
Sure. So one of my favorite Jewish food stories is how Jewish immigrants in Manhattan's Lower East Side began eating Chinese food in the 1800s. The menus were exotic, written in Chinese, and rarely used dairy, and were thus sort of de facto kosher because no one asked what was in the stuff. And also, you know, there was no real history of anti-Semitism among the Chinese, as there was, you know, if a Jew were to go into a Polish or a German or an Italian restaurant, they might not feel as comfortable there. So eventually, of course, this grew into the custom of Jews eating Chinese food during Christmas. So, you know, maybe sometimes what makes a food Jewish is who's eating it, and not necessarily even the original intent of that food. I don't know if you agree or disagree.
I think I sometimes would agree with that. I mean, I'm like, you know, I'm a Jew from New York, from Manhattan, so definitely can relate to eating Chinese on Christmas. I think there's so much like kind of, I mean, I'm sure there's, you know, very sophisticated research about why, you know, this happened or why it caught on, but also the fact that it's, you know, a place that's open on Christmas, I think has something to do with it when like almost everything else is closed. You know, Jews have to eat and they want to be celebratory too, you know, in their own way. I think on Christmas when they're kind of left out of some of those celebrations. I think that, yeah, there's such like a wide runway for like what is considered, you know, Jewish food and who is making the decisions about what is or isn't Jewish food. We had a really like, we collaborated with an amazing woman a few months ago for the fall holidays. Her name is Jamie Way. and she's Taiwanese, and she married someone Jewish, and she shared recipes, and we also did a big profile and on our archive, but also some videos with her on our social media about how she combined kind of like her culinary traditions like with her husband's. Like she made like these like steamed buns that were kind of like a combination of like a Taiwanese steamed bun with like challah. She made like brisket, but in the style of like a beef noodle soup. So that was like, you know, amazing to learn from her and think about how, you know, essentially two people coming together in a marriage can produce kind of like even a new type of cuisine that was, the menu was intended for Rosh Hashanah. So of course, like I would consider that at least adjacent to Jewish food or Jewish food. So, you know, we hear a lot of stories like that because a lot of our research focuses on a family's, you know, journey and where they were either forced, you know, to move to, or where they immigrated for various reasons. And they're kind of like picking up different pieces, you know, along the way of those cuisines and making essentially their, you know, their own dishes from that.
I can imagine, this is not autobiographical, but, you know, kids who grew up in Sunday school and maybe every time they drive home on Sunday, they stop at McDonald's. So like for the rest of their lives, they associate McDonald's with Jewish education or that experience. And then McDonald's becomes for them like a Jewish restaurant. Do you hear any stories about maybe things that are so idiosyncratically tied in with someone's Jewishness that maybe they don't fit the profile that you're creating through your project?
That's a very, very interesting question to think about. Like, again, as a, like I grew up eating a lot of Jewish food. I think that was like pretty typical for New York families. Not that my family cooked so much, but that we would take out, like always had a lot, you know, appetizing at every, you know, family occasion. Loved Second Avenue Deli. My grandmother would cook like a few kind of like of her family recipes, I would think. But one recipe from my mom's side of the family was that for Thanksgiving, we always had turkey cooked in a paper bag. I don't know if you've ever seen this method before. So for me, I always associated Thanksgiving with turkey cooked in a paper. It was like a giant paper bag. You'd have to like oil up this bag, put the turkey in. Like that was my family tradition that I associated with Thanksgiving. Now, we shared my recipe and family story on the archive, and after talking to like a few other people, I think that we have to do even more research on it, but I think that there was a trend among my mom grew up in the Bronx, like among Jews from this region, and maybe it was in like a Hadassah magazine, or maybe this recipe was somewhere like in a newspaper that they all read or something, but there was a small group of people that still do a Thanksgiving turkey in this way, and there's something like Jewish or Jewish about it, but it's obviously for Thanksgiving and like an American holiday. So that's what I associate. That's one of my strongest family recipes, but again, it's not really typically Jewish. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, I've looked through in the past some like turn of last century Hadassah cookbooks and things like that, which have these interesting negotiations, like elevating some of the poverty foods from Eastern Europe, like fried brains and stuff like that, but dressing it up in a way that's more elegant for the assimilating kind of aristocratic clientele, you know, as people are becoming more affluent in America. So, I mean, you're right, like sometimes a recipe will appear somewhere and then that will catch on among a particular group. And, you know, who cares where it came from? I guess if it tastes good and if it connects you, then I guess it's Jewish.
As I said, I think that I feel lucky to be part of this community and the fact that we have this like, you know, this wide runway, you know, to work with and so many different foods, you know, to celebrate and to cook and to eat. So I never get bored, I'll say that.
Do you have any favorite Jewish food stories or recipes from the Jewish Food Society archives?
Before I started working in Jewish Food Society, like I really never baked or made challah. Like I had eaten it and maybe I had like made it at a friend's or like, but it wasn't, again, not to, I'll share again personally, like my family was like interested, I think, more in assimilating. Like, I mean, my grandparents were all born here, but for my grandmother, who I was very close with, like she went to college and she wanted to have a job and she wasn't like super interested in cooking. She was more interested in like going to restaurants and, having a career that would support that. So she was an amazing woman. So again, I never like come home on Friday afternoon and like find my mom and grandma like making challah like in our kitchen. It wasn't something I grew up with. But when we were like deep in the pandemic and we were doing like a lot of virtual programming, we ended up doing a Zoom with this chef from Israel, Erez Komarovsky. And he led kind of a workshop about how to use like seasonal like ingredients, whether those are like herbs or even flowers, like and braid them into a challah. And I one of my favorite things to do in the summer is go to Fire Island. And I didn't do it this summer, but I think I did it the summer before. I made like a challah in Fire Island with some foraged ingredients, seasonal summer ingredients. So that was one of like the favorite things that I was inspired to do, definitely from our archive. And I also think that just getting acquainted with and cooking with some of like the North African flavors, like especially Moroccan, I wasn't that familiar with those flavors growing up, but a lot of Moroccan and North African families start like the savory, they have for Shabbat as one of their savory courses, like this spicy fish called chraime. And I don't have quite the good accent. That's like guttural. It's a very specific sound. I'm still working on it. But it's like a fish cooked in like peppers and tomatoes. And that's something like that I will always bring to the table. If I'm like hosting friends, that's one of my favorite dishes that I've learned how to make from the archive.
As we've alluded to, food is also very personal. It can connect us to memories, people, places, moments in time, and to our identity, our heritage, real or imagined. So why do you think that food is such a powerful connector?
I think that it's really just at the center of like core memories. I think that that's what makes it so powerful, is that with a bite and with a taste, you can be like transported to another place. Like, when was the first time I had this? Or is a dish like comforting, and is it like a taste of home? That's what I think people connect to incredibly strongly, is like, we don't live in the same kind of way that we did, previously. A lot of people are living far away from their families, right? Our lifestyle is different. We don't cook as much, as we did previously. So I think what people are, especially like in these incredibly challenging and dark times that we're in now, people want something that is a comfort and that connects them to their past. And obviously, like, food is delicious. It's fun to gather around a table. It's exciting to share like your own culture or your own family's food. But again, I think it's two things. It's really just about being able to be transported to another place, and then also kind of on the other side of that, having a sense of who you are and comfort and memory from food that you might have had when you were growing up or on a trip, or, just at a moment that really stayed with you.
What's the best way to get involved in the Jewish Food Society and support the work you do? I understand you have a book coming out.
Yeah, so you can find our global recipe archive at jewishfoodsociety.org. We update it, every week, and I really encourage everyone to sign up for our newsletter, which you can sign up to via our website. We share stories there. We share our upcoming events there. And I think I can safely say that I know that you will love our newsletter. I know a lot of, newsletters are, they sometimes have a lot of things you don't need. I think the Jewish Food Society newsletter has everything you do need. And you can follow us on social media. We're just at Jewish Food Society, and we're most active on Instagram and TikTok. You can find us there. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Our first book is being published this spring. It's called The Jewish Holiday Table, and it is based in some ways, on our research that we're doing, every week on the archive, but it's centered around seasons and holidays. And so within each season, there are the holidays that fall into that season. And for example, we can go back, to Passover. In the Passover section, there'll be like 5 different family tables and menus from around the world. So like Fanny Gerson's Mexican table, Sasha Shore, an amazing woman in New York, her Russian Passover table, showing just the global aspect of Jewish food when it comes to holidays and family traditions. So that will be out in March, and our pre-sale will be happening soon. So again, if you'll sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social, you'll know all the details.
That sounds terrific. Thank you so much for joining us, Amanda.
Sure.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.